Hi, I'm Ben White. I'm the director of the Student Conduct Office here at UC San Diego, and I'm here today to provide some student conduct related COVID-19 policy updates. So over the summer, we made some policy revisions to deal with COVID-19 conditions and the COVID-19 epidemic overall here on campus. One change we made was to our student conduct procedures, and that is our university student conduct code. And the key change that we made to that was adding a new standard of conduct around violation of health and safety requirements. And that's in section C 4E in the standards of conduct. What this provides is it brings in the health and safety requirements that the campus has put into play, including social distancing and other related requirements, along with San Diego County guidance as well. So these things are now incorporated into the student conduct code. We also created some campus policies related to COVID-19. And one of them is the face coverings policy, and that's in the Policy and Procedure Manual, better known as PPM 516-30. And this states that students who are on campus must wear a face covering while they're on university property or at university buildings or facilities in the San Diego area. It also reverts to whatever the local guidance is from the San Diego County around face coverings. So that is important to know and understand. There's also some exceptions in there around children under 2 don't have to wear a face covering. If you're exercising by yourself, you don't have to wear a face covering. So make sure that you're familiar with that policy and the accompanying San Diego County requirements. We also have a COVID-19 testing policy, and that's PPM 516-31. So that states for students who are on our campus, especially students who are in housing facilities, have to be regularly COVID tested. And this is really around health requirements to ensure that our students are on campus, they're safe, they're healthy, and there's not extra spreading of COVID-19. Specifically in the residential areas, students living in the residential areas have to test twice when they first move in, go through a quarantine period, and then they're able not to have to wear their masks or socially distance within their living areas. But those are two key campus policies that have been put into effect that are important to know about. We also have changes to the Housing and Residential Life Community Standards. So Section 10 of those community standards is around guests and non-primary residents. Specifically, the housing areas are resident-only communities for 2020-2021. So if you live in a Mir building, you aren't able to go over to a Revell building. And even more specifically, if you live in Mir and you live in Tioga, you can't go to one of the other buildings. So there's a limitation on where you can go as far as buildings go. And that's, again, around potential spreading of COVID-19, keeping the amount of people that are interacting with each other, especially without masks, to a minimum. There's also resident visitation issues. So within your living spaces, after you've gone through the required 2 testing and the quarantine period, you can be in your living space without having to wear a mask or socially distant. There's also some talk about having pods, which would allow living spaces to join with other living spaces. That's not in effect right now, and it's likely not to be in effect for at least till the winter quarter. If that does happen, you'll get more information from your housing and residential life staff and campus messaging. There's also an exception within that for necessary caregivers. That really comes into play in the graduate and family housing areas. So if you have necessary caregivers who need to come into a residential space for your kids, that exception is built into the guest and non-primary residence policy. And then with health and safety, that's section 11, there is a mask requirement for folks that are within the housing and residential life areas, and it covers exemptions as well, just like the face coverings policy in the other area. So 2 key important pieces to know and understand with the housing and residential life community standards. So for our sanctioning guidelines, we have detailed sanctioning guidelines for all types of violations, and you can find these on studentconduct.ucsd.edu. We have them for alcohol violations, housing and residential life violations, and all other violations. In response to COVID-19, we've developed specific sanctioning guidelines for COVID-19 related cases. So specifically for guest policy violations, gatherings, elevator violations, and on down the line. So for a first-time low-level violation, and what we look at for a low-level violation is not wearing a face covering on campus when 6 feet social distance can't be reasonably maintained or otherwise required by a health officer, hosting 2 or less guests in a campus residential facility, or not following social distancing guidelines. Those are what we consider first-time low-level violations. They result in probation for a minimum of 1 quarter and also a reflection or research paper if necessary. One thing I'll note about probation, probation's a middle-level sanction. So it's around things such as health and safety violations, for example, and this is certainly a health and safety violation. Probation is at UCSD an enhanced warning. So you start with a warning, you have probation, then you have your larger things such as suspension or dismissal. So merely having probation will not keep you from specific activities as it does at some campuses, but it's really an enhanced warning. So if you're on probation for a quarter, you get off probation, then you aren't on probation anymore, so you don't have to worry about it. But it is a more of a middle level type sanction, and we've calibrated these sanctions because of the health and safety risk. So for middle level violations or repeat low level violations, it's probation for a year and our practical decision making, assessment, and reflection, which really focuses around decision making. Examples of mid-level violations include hosting a medium-sized gathering in a campus residential space, failing to immediately provide proof of compliance with the mandatory testing program, and remember that is ppm 516-31, so if you want to take a look at that a little bit further, and then intentionally disregarding physical distancing and sanctioning guidelines related to the spread of COVID-19. So again, more of your middle level type things. And then our third tier, egregious violations, repeat noncompliance, repeat mid-level violations, and repeated low-level violations. That usually is probation for tenure for those repeated mid-level violations, or suspension or expulsion from the university for egregious violations or repeated noncompliance. There could also be an exclusion from campus areas or university functions for these types of violations. And there also could be educational sanctions such as a reflection piece, a referral to a student conduct officer, or a reflection paper as well. Some examples of egregious violations or the third level violations: knowingly disregarding a quarantine directive, failing to complete required COVID testing, or non-compliance with the mandatory COVID testing program, forcibly removing somebody's face covering without that person's consent, intentionally coughing on another person or property, or hosting a large-size gathering in a campus residential space or off-campus residence. Thing to note about off-campus residence, we do have jurisdiction over off-campus behavior, so if we receive reports from people from outside the university stating that these things happen off campus, we have the right to exercise jurisdiction on those cases. So I want to provide a key resource here, and that's the Office of Student Conduct website. That's studentconduct.ucsd.edu. Our front page, we're turning that into a key landing space for our key updates and sanctioning guidelines to provide those pieces of information in an easily accessible format. On the left side of the page, you'll see various tabs. 3 key tabs to note are the incident report form, so that allows you to submit an incident report of an issue that you see on campus or off campus. All of our procedures, and that includes all the policies that I've discussed within this presentation, and then our student conduct and COVID-19 tab, and that has all key information, guidance around our processes and other key up-to-date information. So we encourage you to check out our website. If you have questions and comments, please send those to studentconduct@ucsd.edu, and you also can check with our website as well. So thank you for watching this presentation, and we wish you the best over this quarter.